Yeah.
There you go. Okay. Well, hi, everybody. We are recording this, Alex. Alex is the author of Creative Courage and the host of a video series and podcast called Creative Courage Chats. His goal is to demystify the idea of the individual and group creative processes and discuss creativity as a necessary problem-solving skill. So with no further ado, I'm going to give it to control to Alex, and he's going to do his thing.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I basically, I like that this is a small group. You know, I'd like to make it a conversation, if you like, going forward. But a brief history, as I've worked as an artist pretty much my whole life, on and off, in different ways. I was a cartoonist. I did fine art, on the side. I was even a musician as a kid, and like a lot of us were, we're in bands and doing that kind of stuff. But I've always kind of been pursuing creativity, and I fell into the role fell into the role, but I'm a partner at a marketing firm for the last 20 years. And as creative director, my job has been to get people to give me their best art for more than a paycheck. And, you have to really encourage people and inspire people and get them to really give you their best ideas. And I've kind of, over the years, learned a lot from working with a lot of young artists and a lot of young creatives, writers, and all sorts of filmmakers and stuff like that in terms of marketing. And it's taught me a bit about how to communicate with them, and then also how to see creativity in a different way. So I was going to share my PowerPoint, but I wanted to also kind of, make it a conversation as well. One of the ways I'm not going to show you, but one of the things that I like to do to start it off is I like to show the prologue to Henry V. Where Shakespeare had a problem when he was trying to do this story about this young English king, and he was at war with France. And it was a massive story of huge battles between huge countries and armies. But Shakespeare didn't have CGI. He had a little wooden stage, and he had a handful of people, minstrels. And so he had a problem. In his head, he had this massive thing that he wanted to share. But then there was the what they were viewing that was a problem that people were seeing and they're perceived. So he did this prologue at the beginning, and he's summing it up. He basically is saying, when you see somebody walk on stage and they have a crown on, don't think of just an actor with a crown. Think of a kingdom. When you see somebody come up with armor, don't think of a man with armor. Think of an army. And so he started to try to kind of reach out to the crowd. He broke that wall so he could start communicating with the crowd to change their perception. And that's what I want to do at the beginning of this. Is everybody has their own perceptions of what creativity is and how they view it. And my goal, it's actually almost becoming kind of my religion now, is to try to show people that there's very few things that are as important as your creativity, because creativity is at its root is problem solving. It's taking a bird and staking a horse and putting it together and making a Pegasus. It's taking things that we know, that we've carried throughout our whole lives, and putting them together and coming up with something totally brand new. And that's how great things happen. Everything amazing that's ever happened in humanity was caused through that process, was through people being able to find solutions to their problems. Now, creativity is also kind of diminished in that a lot of times we just associate it with art. It's fantastic that it is, and it's important, but that's so limiting, because a lawyer is incredibly creative because they have tons of data and they are presented with a problem. They take all of that knowledge and they figure out a path that's going to lead them in a certain direction. And we need to think about in those terms, is gathering data. Everything's about gathering data going forward. And I think that when we start thinking of creativity as problem solving, we start to see that everybody does it. All of us are constantly solving problems. Every day we're doing it in many different levels. So when people say they're not creative, they're kind of suggesting that they're not problem solvers, which is silly, and everybody is. And I think that it's important to start looking at it that way, because that's why I believe the arts are important, especially at a young age for young people, because at a young age, they're intuitively creative. Their brains are so hungry for information and data when they're younger. And we kind of systematically deprogram them We force them into situations where we limit them, or we judge them, and we create this myth that failure is bad, that they need to avoid failure. And no one learns anything without failing. Anybody that knows anything knows that. All of us know that we've learned our best lessons from the times we've failed. And that's like just this thing. But for some reason, systematically in education, we tend to tell them that failure is bad, and we don't challenge them enough in a lot of ways, in my view. So basically, like I said, creativity is problem solving. So I'm going to share one of the let's see. So here is the PowerPoint that I have. This is where the video is. So here, let me go ahead and show you this. So can everybody see this?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So this is the PowerPoint. So actually I'm going to skip through this. So yeah, so I see data as like I said, this is I already kind of talked about this, but in your mind we carry tokens, and these tokens are things we value. So things that we experience that we think are important, we take them in and we hold them, and we store them in our subconscious. We have the subconscious and the conscious mind, obviously. And obviously, every waking moment we have, we're working in our conscious mind. That's where we make our choices, where we're able to make decisions and stuff like that. But our subconscious is also there, and it's next to us, but we don't control the subconscious. The subconscious does whatever it wants. It's kind of like having a superhero as a friend that you never call on, that's just sitting next to you the whole time, ready to help you out when you need it. And when people are saying they're sitting in front of a empty piece of paper and they're trying to struggle and waiting for an idea to come to them, there is no idea that comes to them. It's inside them already, and they just bring it out of themselves. And I think where those things come from, when you get that snap idea that pops into your mind, I think it comes from our subconscious. Because our subconscious, although we don't control it, we can program it. And we program it by deciding what our values are. So when we decide that, let's say for a guitar, you're a guitarist, or you want to be a guitarist, and you've just made this decision, I want to learn how to play guitar, then you've established that that's a value you have. And your subconscious hears that and then decides, okay, every time I see something or we hear a guitar, I'll make a note of it, and I'll keep that in your subconscious. So that when you sit down and you start practicing guitar, I'll start tossing that over the wall towards you. And those little bits that come down to you is the inspiration that you get to start working on the guitar. And that's when the memory of all the things that you've heard in the past. And what we don't realize is that even if we weren't paying attention in our conscious mind to a guitar riff that's going on in the room while we're sitting there, our subconscious is absorbing it and taking it in and listening and holding it and recording it. And I think that's an important thing to consider, is our exposure. When we expose ourselves to things that we value, it sets us up to have better data, so that when we actually go to work, we're in a better position to use these little stars, like, little tokens that we carry around with us. So for example, like I said, one of those could be a horse, the other one could be a bird, and creativity is basically putting them together and turning them into a Pegasus, right? So that's just one way of doing it. Now, in terms of problem solving, I like to use this example. So thinking of creativity as problem solving, this is one that, it's funny, whenever I show this, oh, no, this is a different part. Sorry, I'm going off the mark here a little bit. Let me see. Here we go. Let's do this here. So this is an interesting way of looking at it, in my view, is looking at problem solving. And it's interesting how, I'll tell you a little bit about how this has worked out in the workshops I've done. When I have a room full of kids as opposed to a room full of adults, there's different answers here that I get. But I show them this image. This is called an impossible box. And obviously by looking at it, you can tell why it's called an impossible box. So my question that I usually give people is, if I was to give you hammer and nails and boards or beams of wood, could you build this? And that's my question. You couldn't, right?
No, you can't.
You can't, right? So when we look at it, this is how we always look at problems. This is why we struggle sometimes. I think we see something and our initial idea is, no, it's clearly impossible to build that. That's why it's called an impossible box. And we basically are deciding before we even do the work. We decide, we've made a judgment before we even do the work that we can't do it. So we're demotivated and we don't even try. This is something that you could build with a hammer and nails and boards if you just change the way you look at it. If you change the way that you look at this particular problem, you can actually see that it is possible to build it. And it was just the manner in which we were looking at it. If we change and shift the way we look at something, sometimes we can actually find a solution we didn't know was there. But we stop too early before we can find the answer. And I think that's an important thing. Even the most intelligent people in the world do this. Because they're intelligent, they get this little bit of arrogance and they don't trust their ability to solve problems. There's a process that's involved in solving a problem. It's a voyage you have to take to reach a solution sometimes. And we don't know what we're going to see on the way that's going to help us get to the solution that we need. But I think that in society, and I think that we're suffering from this problem right now, and what we can see constantly, is people make snap judgments on our ability to solve particular problems. And a lot of times I think that they're wrong. That if we actually took our time and actually worked at something and changed the way we approach it, we might be able to find a solution. So this is the thing that I always thought is interesting. When I show this to people, the first time, I'd say 99% of the time people answer, no, you can't build this. But kids take longer to decide. And one actually said this: the shadow's weird. If you look at the shadow in the box, they don't correlate at all. And it was curious to him that there's something weird going on. And then when I showed them, that was the clue that you could get. So there is a clue there, but nobody took the time to look at all the angles and everything, even though at this level, you can still see it. So I think this is an interesting example of how to, and it's interesting to me also that it was a young person. This was a kid who was about 12 years old. He came to the workshop because his mom was interested and he was forced to come, and he wasn't so happy about it. But when he saw this, he was interested. And it was interesting that his young mind, because a young mind isn't as cynical as ours is, that they're so hungry and wanting to find solutions. They're looking and scanning a lot more than we are, and they're doing the calculations a lot more. And I don't know if you agree with this, especially because of the group. But I think that when you're younger, I think you're just a better problem solver because you have to be. And I think that the people that are able to be better in creativity and problem solving are the people that are still reaching back to that curiosity that they had when they were young, at looking at the world through those younger eyes and able to see things that normally you would not, able to be able to notice. Anyway, is there any questions or anything going forward? Does anything make any? Okay.
Now that you've unrotated it, I can see it even in this position. You can see how it could be real.
Yeah, right. So now that you understand where it is, you can see where the breaks are and see how the shape, it just changes the way that you perceive it. So the other, I'm going to go backwards now a little bit. So this portion is, I call it the voyage, is something to consider. Now, this is something to consider when you're maybe in a group. I mean, some of us are on boards, and stuff. I'm sorry to say, it's one of my least favorite places to be is on a board, because it's so, sometimes I wonder if solutions are happening in those situations. But when you're in a group and all of you are working together to find a solution, there's something that sometimes we don't consider. First of all, there's a lot of different personalities. So you have some people that actually are very, very open to share their ideas. These are the heroes in the room. These are the people that think they have the answer to everything, and they're the loudest, and they're the people that are out there sharing the most ideas. And then there are the quiet people who normally don't say anything, who just sit there and absorb data. And usually maybe the next day they'll come back and they'll have their solution to you, and everything. So there's different kinds of people in the room. But if we start thinking about this, that if we start considering the fact that everybody, when they're thinking about an idea or kind of trying to come up with a solution, they are going through an incredible voyage in their mind that we're not privy to, because we can't see it, because it's happening in their mind. But if we were able to actually see above their heads the voyage they're going on, and you look across the room and you see the voyage everybody's going on, we would have a totally different perception of the value of the ideas that these people are bringing to the table. Because a lot of times we devalue people's ideas because of maybe their mannerisms or the way they are, who they are, or where they come from. But all of us, when we're trying to solve a problem, in a split second, we are evaluating our successes, our failures, testing things out in our minds, calculating things. And these things, these places that we go are curiosities that's taking us to. It's all coming from our subconscious and all the information that it held. Because the only thing you store in your subconscious are things you value. That's important to think about, because obviously the things you've learned in school, everything's in there because that's part of it, because you were exposed to that. But all the things outside of school that are valuable is that if you don't value it, it's not going to stick. It's just not going to. So that's the thing that I think is important, especially with young people. If they're curious about something, take them to a library and have them do research. Everything that I was slightly curious about, I had a library within walking distance from my house when I was a kid. And The Godfather, I had to know everything about the mafia when I did that movie. And I went in there and I did all the research, and I sat there in books and dug into them, and I delved into it so deeply that I got a lot of information that I was curious about. That's a natural curiosity. But a lot of us don't do that anymore. And now with the internet also, there's not a lot of qualified information there. A lot of people just take it for granted, and they don't do the research. And I think that's an important thing to consider.
Alex?
Yeah.
You know what that slide reminds me of?
What?
The old story, and I know it's true, where they would pick up in the boardroom you were talking about, they would pick up the papers that people had doodled on afterwards, and they'd give them to the psychologist.
Yeah. I'm a huge doodler. I spend a ton of time doodling, and it's actually I would post those on social media. This is the doodle I did at my last meeting, because and I look at the doodle and I know why I did it. I know exactly what it's. Nobody else understands what it is. To me, it's a note that's relevant to something I need to remember.
Well, that last one, they would have a field day with that.
Yeah, a great tool to do when you're in a group of people doing a meeting is I learned from a gentleman that worked for Disney, and there's a brainstorm method that they used that was the same they used when they were doing movies, the storyboarding. And you might know this already, but when you have a room of diverse people and some of the people are very shy, you don't have to worry about the ones that aren't, because they'll tell you everything they think anyway. But the ones that are shy are the ones that you're worried about, because they're the ones sometimes that have incredibly good ideas, and we have the disadvantage of their shyness. Humility and shyness kills creativity, because people don't express themselves and share their ideas. And the best way to get them to share it is do this card method, where you hand out cards to everybody and they just put one-line ideas on this card, and then they throw it in the middle of the table, and then somebody gathers them and puts them up on a wall. So it's easier now because you're not being judged. You don't need courage anymore. You don't need creative courage, because that's the thing is, I don't want to be judged. That's why I didn't want to share my idea. I don't want people to think I'm stupid. But if it's on a card, now the card's being judged on the wall, not me. And then when people start seeing that their idea is actually making people excited and people like it, it encourages them to go ahead and start voicing why they had that idea. It works 100% of the time. Every single meeting I've ever had in a situation where people are kind of, client or something that is kind of shy, not really wanting to do it, we do this method, and he gets his ideas out there. By the end, he's feeling good about him having his idea evaluated and seen. That the thing that we have sometimes that keeps us from offering ideas is something that I think is from our, our little lizard brain from the days back when we would say to ourselves, don't go in that cave because there's a bear in that cave and it's going to eat us. Well, the same thing that's making you afraid of going in the cave is making you afraid of trying an idea, except that you're not going to get mauled to death if you try an idea. It's something internally in us, that keeps us from doing things. I heard I don't want to get derailed too much on this, but anyway, so this, I don't know if anybody speaks Spanish, but Todo es ceremonioso en el jardín salvaje de la infancia by Pablo Neruda is a line from one of his poems. It's one of my favorite poets. Does anybody know what that says? Nobody speaks Spanish? Okay. Everything is ceremonial in the wild garden of our childhood is what that means. And it's interesting to me because I think that this is just an example of something I already talked about. Whenever you see a kid draw a person, and it looks something like this. And I'm sure all of us have had, nieces, nephews, grandkids, kids, and you've seen little kids drawing a picture, and it looks kind of like this when they're drawing a person. Your first perception is, that's adorable and that's cute. They can't draw because they're not have the skill yet, because they're just kids. So I challenge that thought, because what's relevant? Is it their ability to draw a person and make it look like a person, or what they're trying to say? Because if you look at a kid when they draw this drawing, why did they make it this way? Maybe it's not because they can't draw a torso. Maybe they drew it this way because the only thing that's relevant to them is the face. Because when they speak to somebody, they're looking at the face. When, food comes to the face, they smell, it's on the face. The ears are on the face. Everything is here. This is a person to them. Arms are just there to bring food to the face, and legs are there to move the face around. So when they draw, they're drawing the head because in their minds, that is who a person is. And they could care less about your impression of their drawing. They're trying to communicate something that they see and they value. So which is more important? And have any of us been so courageous in our expression of an idea that we didn't care what anybody thought about it? We just went and expressed it. That takes a ton of courage as an adult. It's easy as a kid because you don't have all the fear of judgment. And I just think that's an interesting way, or wondering if we've ever approached, or if anybody ever approaches things with that much courage. That's why I call this thing creative courage, because at its core, creativity requires us to go against our own personal fears that are totally self-imposed, but we don't allow ourselves to explore things and express things. And I think that's something that I often see, and I'm trying my best to change as much as possible. Anyway, so yeah, I guess I could show this too here. So this is some statistics and information. Well, okay, this is how this starts now. I'm doing this because usually I'm doing this and I'm able to see my notes here. But here's an example of what I was talking about already. And I don't mean to flog a dead horse here. But, when we grow older, our creativity starts diminishing, right? And so you have this situation where you have a huge container holding our creativity as a kid. But when we're older, it's all crammed into a little, container. It's still there, but it's not as much. And so this is a curious question. And I think there's a lot of different answers to it. Does anybody have an opinion as to why it is we're less creative as we get older? Because it varies in reasons. If anybody has any thoughts on that, I'm curious. If not, that's fine. Going forward.
The pressure of knowing how things are supposed to be.
Right. And, that's true. Or your perception of how they're supposed to be, right?
Right.
Right. So this is an interesting statistic thing that I saw. It was from 2011. I'm sure there's something newer now, but it's still relevant, I think, is that we know IQ, but we don't think of CQ. And I think that it's interesting that this data showed that as we get older, our IQ increases, but our creativity decreases. And I think that sometimes we think they're the same thing. And, high personal IQ, or somebody that's very creative must have a high IQ. But an IQ is different than a CQ. IQ is about data and understanding and remembering and holding data, right? CQ is what you do with the data. So I think that this is very important. I think that you need to, it's important for us, if we're going to go forward and try to solve some of the bigger problems we have in the world, it's important for people to start considering the fact that the data is more important than anything else. Unfortunately, data now is attached to propaganda and bias in different ways, and it's difficult to kind of come to a conclusion because everybody has their own opinions on directions they need to go in, and it's hard to pull people away because to some people science isn't relevant to some of them, and understanding science is opposing some other views that they have. But I do think it's important, and there's ways of approaching these things that are encouraging for anybody, because everybody likes to be listened to and heard, and I think that that's an important side of this thing. But anyway, so these are just I went through my own thoughts on what some of the reasons are of why this happens. But I'm going to go ahead and jump over to my idea of utopia. So when we are trying to come up with an idea or working on a project or working on anything new, we have this vision in our minds, and I call it the utopia of the idea, this beautifulness of the idea, this thing, it's because it's perfect. And then we try to actually do it. And it isn't even close to being what it is that you're trying to do, the utopian idea that you're trying to do. Which I'm gonna go ahead and get out of this for a second. Let me see. Can I? Oh, did I just leave?
You're up.
Okay. So hold on, let me get back here. So yeah, I like to, instead of using that imagery, I'm going to go ahead and show you. So when we have an idea, it's amazing and it's perfect and it's up here, and then when we do it, it's only about this good. In our minds, we want it to be this, but when we do it, it's never that good. So there's two things we do. We're taught, if you really want something, you got to work for it. You got to practice and work and fight and practice, and if you fail, get back up and keep working and try to get up towards this thing. Except that there's a problem that while we're doing this and we're working towards the utopia, the time it takes to get there and all that practice, you get better and your expectations of yourself grow, so utopia shoots up higher and you're back where you started. And so then you do the same thing and the utopia keeps being out of your reach. And I think this thing in our own minds, this beautiful utopian thing that we have that we're chasing all the time, it's so frustrating because we can't reach it, that it's discouraging. And sometimes people decide to stop chasing it and try something else that they think they can catch. And then they find it's the same problem, that they're not able to reach it. And people don't realize, true creatives realize that it's in the chase. The chase is what's important, not the reaching of the thing. And that's the people that keep our consistency. That's where the Michael Jordans of the world come from. That's where the princes of musicians like Prince come from. This is where all the great creatives come from. This is where the scientists like Einstein come from. It's because they realize that the beauty of the thing is the chase of the idea, is the chase of this thing that's in your mind. But unfortunately, especially in kids, they try and they don't reach this expectation they have because they idolize something and they want to be as good as that person. But what they don't realize is that person's chasing the thing as well. They're doing the same thing. And there's this misconception that you're supposed to reach it, and you're not supposed to. It's put there for a reason because it's what got us out of the caves, is chasing this thing. And this is a misunderstanding that we have about how it works. And I think that's something that is demotivating for a lot of people and causes them to not pursue things that they love, which is a total shame. It needs to be, we need to change that perception. I think it's really important. But okay. And any thoughts? Any thoughts on anything, or any stories or things that are relatable that you want to share? Anybody want to share?
I think it is definitely true that you make goals, and as you start to approach that goal, you realize you can go further. And so I agree with that utopia idea.
Yeah,
that's a good one. Go ahead.
I really, that resonated with me a lot because I am actually working on a large, it's a book, and it's nonfiction, which makes it personal and therefore harder. But it's like, I envision the best it could possibly be. You know what I mean? And then I don't think I can live up to that.
Not supposed to.
Right. But that's very freeing. If I can wrap my mind around that will probably put me in a place where I can say, you know what, it's going to be what it's going to be. And it's going to be the best that I can do right now.
So is it better to start with, let's say that you outline the things that you want to cover. Is it better from a creative standpoint to bite off one topic and drill the bedrock? Or is it better to work on all of them a little bit and keep filling them all in until you feel like you've exhausted everything you can do? I mean, which approach do you think is better? Because I'm about to write a memoir, and I've been going back and forth with trying to figure out how to organize it. It's for my grandkids, actually. That's who I'm writing it for, but I know that other people are going to want to read it. But it's about all the crazy stuff I've done in my life. And so I do it chronologically, or I do the social end of it, the sports end of it, the academic end of it. I'm trying to figure out how to organize it.
Well, okay, this is what I think, this is my advice. For actually authors, we talk with a lot of authors at work, and this is a common struggle. Is, it's hard, it's like you feel like, how do you eat an elephant, right?
Right.
It's the old saying. But I think that what's important is to remember kind of what we talked about early on, where you have this superhero with you, your subconscious, because everything you're going to write about is stored there. Everything that you know is stored there. Everything that is great about you is stored there. It's not coming from anywhere else. Okay, you've already got it. Everything we see, Pablo. Okay, this is another poem by Pablo Neruda, Enigmas, and he says in this poem Enigmas, towards the end, I am the empty net that has gone on ahead of human eyes, dead in those darknesses, a finger accustomed to the triangle longitudes of the timid globe of an orange. I was like you, researching that endless star, and then one night in my net I woke up naked. The only thing caught was a fish trapped inside the wind. So what he says in that poem, and I know it's hard because I'm taking it out of context, but what he says in that poem, that in life, what we do is we throw these nets out into the world, hoping that we're going to catch something amazing, and we bring it back. And when we open up, we find ourselves. There's nothing out there that isn't already in us. It's all there. So what my advice to you, when you're not sure how you're going to go ahead and go about approaching this, I know it's frustrating, but it's just right. And trust that you will eventually reach where you need to be, because you will start writing a sentence about something that happened to you as a young man, and then everything will start to come to you because it's there, and then it'll start guiding you. It's like cartoonists when they got to it. Charles Schulz used to say, he doesn't know where the stories come from. He just creates an environment, throws the characters in, and they decide. Yeah. It's so in tune to who he is. He doesn't have to plan. They'll tell you. They're living in, Charlie Brown and Snoopy, they're all lived in his subconscious. They had their own personalities and their own minds. The human mind is amazingly complicated. And I think that my best way of explaining to it, it's just like, you could be a great violin player and not know how to build a violin, right? So, you don't have to understand how your brain works like as a scientist, but you need to know what it can do and what it's capable of, and trust it, and then follow that. That's an important part.
Well, my problem is that all the material, by definition, comes out of my memory.
Right.
And I'm approaching 72 years old, and I'm starting to forget a lot of things. And every time I think I've thought of all the things that I want to cover, all the anecdotes and crazy stuff, and how I quit jobs to start something new, and took all that risk and everything. It's a combination of forgetfulness, forgetting detail, and sometimes you trigger a thing, you can remember the detail, and also sort of being ADD. So I'll go off on tangents all the time and not come back to the point that I was trying to work on.
Well,
if I could jump in real quick. Yeah. Sorry, Alex. I'm pushing 50 and I'm having the same problem. And it's like with stuff that happened last year. You know what I mean? Like I'm worried that I'm
more quickly. So
yeah. Well, I'm worried that I'm not going to capture things the way they were at the moment. You know what I mean? Like I take notes and I try to do stuff like that to remind myself. But that's my main worry too, Len, is my memory. Like I don't remember.
You're not going to capture things the way you want them. You're not going to. But what you capture is going to surprise you. And that's the beauty of this thing, is that we are often, people that dive in are often surprised by what happens. You surprise yourself. This is how I try. I was going to say this before, but this is how amazing our brains are. And I think that this is a way I try to illustrate it to people sometimes. If you think about dreams, right? When there's a story going on in your head, right? Who wrote that story? We did, right? Who's deciding who the actors are? Who's writing the script? Who's creating the scenery? Who's like developing the costumes? We're doing all of it. And we're also watching it like the audience member, not aware that we're the ones who created all of it. We are scared when we see the monster under the bed, but we put the monster there. So there's this dual thing that's happening in our minds. And I'm telling you, it's the subconscious that's doing this. That's why we don't control it. We don't know what it is. It's like a superpower again. We have this thing that we carry with us who has everything that you want. All the stuff that you're hoping for, it's sitting right in there. It's not lost. It's just sitting there. And it's waiting for you to just give it a path. Just start writing.
They talk about, what is it, mnemonic devices, things that help you remember things. I found just recently a gigantic box I had forgotten all about of all these photographs and all the scrapbook stuff and everything that I had kept from various ventures that I had done and things and adventures that I had done. And then all of a sudden things started flying back. It was like it opened up. It was like a key that unlocked the brain cell. It was in there. I just couldn't get to it.
Right.
You know,
that's totally what it is. You are worried that you're going to forget things. So I would say either get a family member or a best friend and get a recorder and have a conversation.
Yeah.
And start talking and just record everything. And then you start capturing things. And I'll bet you anything, you won't even play the recorder.
Well, I'm actually writing it with a recorder using Dragon. You know what that is?
Right.
It's the thing that types it out in what you say.
Oh, that's fantastic.
In Microsoft Word.
Yeah.
I'm not a very fast typist. I can speak much faster than I can type. And that way you could go back and edit it and move it around. So that's
so you're doing everything that you should be doing, and you still feel like you're not doing enough, right? So that goes to my utopian idea.
So I'm afraid I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll think.
Yeah.
I always have a pad of paper on the nightstand. And
you're doing everything right. You're doing everything right.
I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I go, oh, I have to include that. I forgot all about that. You know, and it might have been some old girlfriend I had or some cow we had on the farm or who knows what it is. But but I'll need to write it down, or trust me when I tell you, I wake up the next morning, oh, I had that good idea. What was it? Forget it. It's gone. You know,
it's a Herculean effort to write a book.
Yeah, this is the thing I'm using. It's called the Philips Voice Tracer.
There you go.
And it's like it's like a dictation thing, except it's specifically for this.
Right.
For dictating a book or something.
Next to as far as it's like one of the hardest art forms is being a writer, because writers just beat the hell out of themselves. They're so critical of themselves, and they rewrite and go back and forth. The only art form I think that's harder is stand-up comedy. That's just brutal. But it is a living. So it's rough. That is a rough one. I've never done it. I don't think I could. But I
was in the context of being in a performing group, but I was the comedian. You know. So.
It's rough. It's a rough one. But anyway, going forward. So this is good. So any other questions or anything or any ideas that you want to share? So we could go, and I don't know how much time I have. Do I still have time?
Sure.
Are we okay? Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the other areas to talk about here, I'll look at my PowerPoint real quick. Gosh, where did my mouse go? Let me hold on one second. Okay. Yeah. All right. We'll show that there. My little cursor's disappeared, so it makes it a little difficult to. I'm not sure where.
Okay. Remember to share your screen again.
Yeah, that's what my little, for some reason, my little, the little triangle thing.
Go down the bottom and you go down the
bottom.
Yeah,
no, I just can't see it. It's just gone. Okay, there it is. Where is it? Share. Okay, cool. And then I'll go down to, oh, gosh. Yeah, I'm having a technical difficulty on this thing.
If you put your cursor on it, there you go. We got it.
Okay, there we go. Yeah. Well, that's the thing is I can't see the cursor. It's disappeared for some reason. So it's like highlighting when I go to things.
Is your cursor black or white?
No, it's just disappeared. It's invisible. So I'm not sure why.
It's on the right column by slide number.
Oh yeah, for some reason on my end I can't see it. but I'm trying to go to the play button. Oh, there we go. Okay, except for I don't want it that one. I'll go down to here, and then that stinks. I can't reach it. Okay, well maybe I'll have to go back and just talk about. Stop recording. Gosh, that's so weird.
That's because it's a Mac. If it was a PC, it'd be fine.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay.
You're on slide 16.
Yeah, I know. I can see that. I'm sorry. I'm trying to hit the play button. I can't see the cursor, so I'm gonna have to try to, oh, there it is. Okay, there we go. We're back. Okay. Perfect. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so moments of discovery. Actually, do I want to go there or do I want to go back? Oh yeah, okay, we'll go to moments of discovery. Gosh, I'm sorry, everybody. I'm having the technical difficulties on this.
You're totally fine. Don't worry about a thing.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Cool. Moments of discovery. Okay, this is one area that I think is incredibly important for everybody to think about when they're trying to think of their creativity, is that all of us have had something happen to us that put us on a path that we're on right now. So like either it was advice that we got or it was a life-changing event. It's some of us know what they are, but I think that there's a lot of them that happen to us that we don't know, and we know them, but we just don't recall them, and we don't value them like we should. And I think that knowing these moments of discovery that we have, is really telling, because one of the things that's one of the biggest mysteries of your life is that we live an entire life without really understanding who we are, and what motivates us. And even though we live with the inspiration that we get from things, we never think about what inspires me, really. Did I actually think about that? Do we ever do research on ourselves? And it's this odd thing. And I found that really kind of going back in your life, seeing how you responded to major moments of your life and analyzing why you did those or how that was important, is a good way of really understanding who you are and what motivates you. And that's good data going forward when you start approaching solving problems or whatever you're trying to do, or projects, is when we have this, it builds confidence. When you start to understand these things and see these choices you made, it makes you more confident about your understanding of who you are. And then the doubts that you have start to diminish a little bit, because a lot of times you have to throw yourself into situations that are uncomfortable to do your best work. And that's hard to do if you're not feeling the confidence level that you need to. There's a lot of examples that we have in our lives that has shown that where we had courage and that we showed our bravery, where we stood up for ourselves. And, they're hidden sometimes, and we have to think about those. And so I have an example of one that was important to me. And as I'm talking about it and sharing it with you, I would really like if you guys had one, if you would share it. But if you don't, that's totally fine too. But I would really love to hear your story if you have one of a moment of discovery. So this particular one was when I was about 15 years old, and I worked at my dad's frame shop, and he had a frame shop where he gilded frames and he gessoed frames. And then I worked in the shop, and he in the frame shop, he had things like gesso, and he had canvas, but he laid the canvas down to work on the gesso. And then he had paint, because he'd lay paint on the gesso before he laid the gold on it. And when he'd scratch the gold, it made it look antique-y. And these are the colors that I had a lot of access to when I was a kid. So when I was a kid, I learned how to stretch my own canvas and paint using all the paints that my dad had in the shop. And this was the color schemes that I had. So I saw a Marlboro ad, and I decided to paint it. And instead of making it a cowboy, I made it into an Indian. And this was a large paint. It was about maybe 9 feet wide and whatever it is, 7 feet high or whatever. So it's pretty big. So in Orange County, California, there was a thing called the Fish Fry in Orange County. And I would go there with my parents, and my dad decided to pay for a little 15 by 15 square where I could sell some of my paintings. So I had a few paintings there. And this was the biggest one. It was sitting there. And I was sitting in the booth. I was 15, skinny kid. I was skinny back then. Just sitting there and watching people pass, come and look at my artwork, asking me questions. And then at the far end, there was a POW booth with a bunch of old, tough, Vietnam veterans. And one of them walked over and came over and looked at my painting. And he sat there and stared and stared and stared at the painting. And it got to be, I'm being a little overly dramatic with the music, but it got to be interesting because he stared for so long, and he turned to me and he looked at me and he said, "Did you paint this?" And I said, "Yeah, I painted it." And he said, "You know, when I was in Vietnam and I was a young man, I landed out in the jungle and I was really scared and terrified when I landed out there. And the company that had been there for a while took us in. And one man in particular, he was a Native American, showed me everything I needed to learn to survive in the jungle. He taught me, you know, how to travel light and what to do and what to be careful for. And he taught me everything I knew. I didn't have a dad. My dad died when I was very young. And this guy became kind of my mentor. He taught me about his culture. He taught me what it meant to be a man. He taught me about what it meant to have courage and what was important in life. And he died in the jungle after a firefight. And I forgot, I wiped him from my memory completely until I saw this painting and it all came back. The memory of this guy, for whatever reason, this particular painting snapped that part of his memory in his subconscious, and it brought it all back to him. And he's crying. I'm 15 years old. I'm like, don't know anything. I'm just a kid. I hadn't even kissed a girl yet. And this guy who'd been to hell and back, seen everything, seen horrific things, was brought to tears by a piece of artwork that I did in my dad's shop. That's something that showed me something about the power of not knowing what your work's going to do. That's why it's important to do things like write books. Because, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. You're going to write a book, and one of your grandkids is going to read it. And there's going to be something in there that might do that to him. It might do something to them that'll change them in some way. It's incredibly important for us to try our best to share and create and talk and dig and put things out there without any preconceptions of the value of the thing. Because somebody somewhere is going to consume that and feel something special from it. And we just can't judge what it's going to be before it's done. You know, we can't forecast the impact of this thing. So I think this is an important thing to do, is to really look back and see where your moments of discovery are. Does anybody like have anything?
Yeah, I've got one.
Great.
Let me change the view here. View options. Oops, there you go, gallery. Here. So yeah, that reminded me of something that happened to me. So my grandfather was this fantastic, I had a couple of grandfathers obviously, but one of them was just this most fantastic military, civil educator, you know, this leader, this fantastic person. And he used to tell me things and it never really registered. I mean, you know, I'd listen to it and I'd go, I was a kid, you know, it's not, yeah, you know. Yeah. And he showed me, he said, when I was in World War II, I was in the Atlantic and the Pacific, and he was an admiral in the Navy. And he said at the end of I was on the deck next to Admiral Nimitz when the Japanese surrendered. I was there at the surrender. And, you know, to me, it was like, okay, sure, you know. Well, when he died, I inherited a lot of things from him. And one of them I inherited were these personal letters from Admiral Nimitz to him, and his photographs of him standing there next to him while the Japanese were signing the surrender things. And all of a sudden, it kind of rushed into my head how I had underestimated. You know, of course, at that point in your mind, I wish I could have a half an hour with my grandfather. Right. You know, but I never will. Obviously, he's dead, and a long time. But and then all the things that he said to me started coming back, even though that was when I was 7, 8, 9 years old. You know, and all I knew is that we go down the Philadelphia Naval Yard, and they'd all be saluting the hell out of him. You know, he's the admiral, and we'd go to these ship christenings and things. It didn't register to me of what kind of experience that I had until later, and that all came back to me. You know, and I have this shrine room to him. My wife calls it the shrine to my grandfather. You know, where I've got the famous painting of him and all these letters all framed and everything, and his sword and his hat. And and everything. And I said, yeah, but I mean, they were given to me when he died. And if I don't display them, I mean, nobody will ever remember, And then when my grandkids, I have 14 grandkids, when they come up,
Wow.
and they come into that room, they go, wow, what's that? What's that? I can explain to them, well, that was my grandfather, and all the things he did. So, and he taught at Wharton School of Business, and he did all these different things. And it was like somebody that you really want to aspire to be like,
Right.
And, but the thing that triggered it was when I saw the letters and after he died, the letters and the photograph of him standing there next to Nimitz, where the Japanese person is signing the papers on the deck of the ship. And all of a sudden, it's like, I remember that. I remember him telling me all about that.
Yeah.
Funny.
So right there, you shared a pretty beautiful memory of your grandfather, and I'm just going to guess that everybody else that was listening to it reminded them of their grandparents or things that happened with their grandparents or something. Or no, Tiffany, no, or something else.
Not me. We weren't terribly close with our grandparents because they lived in another state, and they were just like, their personalities weren't just, they didn't really like
But
little
did it remind you of something else, or did it make? Because the thing is that the chain reaction that happens when somebody shares a story, it leads you to something else in your head.
It actually what you were saying reminded me of when that happened for me when I was the reader. You know what I mean? Like, just when I was a young person and like, in my late teens, early 20s, even in my 30s, and I would read something that resonated so deeply. It was as if it was my own experience. You know what I mean? And just, that feeling of being, seen and understood and recognized, and just having a common, even if the experience wasn't the same, the way you felt was so similar that that it's like this bond that you feel with somebody you've never met. And so that part of both reading and writing, because it's like you want that when you're reading and you want to create that when you're writing, that's it's such an intangible, sort of ungraspable gift, because you don't know when it's going to happen. You can't create it and you can't predict it, either as the writer or the reader.
Well, as a writer, it's unintentional. As a writer, you're just writing what means something to you, and then someone's going to relate to it, and you can't inspire people. You can't force inspiration. It has to happen because of what they feel and they know. I've done a lot of these talks on creativity, and I've done a lot of them with kids. And it's interesting to me sometimes the things that they inspire them about what I'm talking about. I didn't even intend it as a thing. But I had a kid who walked up to me, and he didn't talk to me, but he took my business card. And he was 12, and he took my business card, and then he waited 4 years, and then he called me.
Jeez.
And he said, I'm 16. Can I intern with you? And I said, who are you? And he says, well, and he told me that he saw me speak at his school, and that I said a few things, and it made him feel like he needed to do something important. And I don't know what I said to him, and he couldn't remember exactly what it was, but he did keep my business card. I don't know. And that's the thing is, I'm saying it just adds to my understanding. Like, I'm not special. I just like to talk to people, and I like to tell them about things that I love. And I think in the process of talking about the things that I love, if it motivates them to find out something about what they love, then that's what it's about. That's the most important thing. It's really important to be a writer and to do these kinds of things, because you're sharing something very personal and important, with the world, and it's fantastic. And everybody needs to everybody should at least try. Just like they say, try it one day, write a song, just try it, or even the lyrics, or write a poem, or do something, even if it sucks.
But let me use this as a time to promote our next Tuesday. Tiffany, you know what the topic is, right? Should I write a book?
I did see the email, but I haven't started promoting it yet, so I didn't look at it.
Should I write a book?
Should I write a book? There you go.
It's a writer publisher, and she's going to talk about the decision tree and self-publishing and versus regular publishing and all that stuff. So
yeah,
and
that's awesome.
I have a person who is a publisher, and then he's friends with Knopf, the publishing company, who is trying like crazy to get me to write a book, not on my life, but on my expertise, which is business brokerage. And there is no real reason for me to write a book. I mean, monetarily, I could do one little deal and make more commission than I could ever make if I sold a book to every business broker in this country. I wouldn't make as much as if I did an M&A deal or something. It wouldn't take me as long, probably. So the question is, do you do it for legacy? Do you do it for your ego? Do you, what are the reasons you should write this book? So it'll be interesting to hear what this lady says. So
yeah. So that brings me to a thought on, because you talked about your grandfather and then what you just last said. And when my grandfather passed away, I was really young, and he's from Uruguay in South America. And I remember seeing him. He was a writer, and he wrote plays and he wrote speeches for politicians, and he did a lot of service for the community, and he was really well known and loved in the community. And when he died, a lot of people showed up to the funeral, and the legend in my family, because you know how it is, it's always like a legend. The legend is that somebody said, Americo, he was a really great man. I wonder why they didn't erect a statue to him. And it made me think, that's how you need to live your life. Not in a way that gives you a statue, in a way that makes someone ask why there isn't one. That's how you're supposed to do it. And I think that's kind of what I think is important, is to try to just keep giving and keep putting things out there.
It's funny.
I think you should write.
One of my grandkids said something to me that was similar to that. They said, "Do you ever think you'll ever have a statue?" and I said, this is I guess he's about 8 years old and 9 years old. And I said, my objective isn't to have a statue, it's to have a statute. I've written a couple of things that have become law, and they're going to outlive me they'll live almost forever, because they'll repeal the statutes that I got done.
That's great. That's great. So, okay. So I guess I'm going to show one last thing. Okay. If that's okay. Do I have time?
Sure.
Okay. All right. One last thing, and then I'll leave you with that.
Share. That's it.
We're getting right to the end here, right?
Right.
So I still have this is like a two hour thing. I could definitely fill the time, but this is the one I think is important. I like to close with on these ideas, is changing the room. So if you do look me up and you look up Creative Courage Chats and see some of the conversations I've had with people about creativity, because I like to interview people about creativity, and I put them out there as podcasts and on video on YouTube. One of the best ones, or my personal favorites, is with Tom Dowling. He was my experimental painting teacher in college. I lied through my teeth back then to get into his class, because I just wanted to get into this experimental painting class. And he opened my mind to so many things, and he was an amazing person, and now he's a good friend of mine, and I got a chance to interview him from my chat, and I think it's pretty great. But so this is the story of what happened in that class that really kind of taught me something. I think this is an example of really being at the peak creatively when you're able to think of things like this. So the class had what we were trying to do in class was, we had about, I think it was 2 weeks to create a piece of artwork in class. And so what I created is this painting. So this painting was about 10 feet high, and it was, the top part of it was carved out of wood. And then I mounted canvas and I draped it like a tapestry, and then I put weights at the bottom. And then I had this hanging in the class, and then I painted it. And it took a while to paint it, and I had presented it to the class. And the class's job was to critique it. And the response of the class was, wow, that's really kind of depressing and scary. And he looks like he's swimming around in sewage, and he's suffering, and he kind of looks like a zombie. And do you need help? Do you need therapy? Is there something wrong? What's wrong with you? And there was a lot of negativity there from the piece. And like I said, it's a very tall piece. And the class was, they were being rough, and how they were talking about it and what they were saying about it and everything. And I was like, I don't know. This just came out of me. I just painted. You get told to just go, and do things. And this came out of me. And then everybody shared their ideas. And then Tom waited till everybody was done. And when everybody calmed down, he said, well, this is the most optimistic painting I've seen all semester. And he walked up to it and he said, it's interesting to me that the guy went through the muck and dug himself out, and he got his head above water. And we're all under the waterline looking up at him, criticizing him. And he said that changed the way everybody looked at the painting after that. Everybody changed their whole idea of the painting and the way they perceived it, because he was putting them in the place of people that were placing judgment on this thing. And I think that was just fascinating to me. It basically changed the entire room. Everybody after that was thinking it was really cool. And a second ago, they were all thinking it was a terrible painting. He just changed the way they looked at the painting.
Cool.
Changed his perception. So that was basically.
That's neat.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's what there's my little thing that happens right after the end of my PowerPoint. Sorry about that. I didn't intend that to happen. But
well,
anyway,
Alex, this has been wonderful. I'd like to remind everybody that this is part of the Southern Nevada Mensa Zoom event presentation every Tuesday. And we'll be posting this on the Southern Nevada Mensa site. So you'll live forever, Alex, or until electrons go wherever they go when they die. So
there's
also,
way too much.
never apologize for a product plug, because that is your intellectual, property, and you got to make a living. And you've taken the time to be here for free, so absolutely plug your stuff.
Oh, no, that's great. Yeah, there's way too much stuff out there about me anyway. So if anybody's curious, you can go to my website, alexraffi.com. I got a lot of stuff out there.
What do you say, Bonnie? I haven't heard a thing from you. Nothing. Just hit the space bar.
Find the right button. It was very, very interesting. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
How about you, Terry?
Yeah, it was kind of thought-provoking for me. As you were talking, I tried to think back to times in my life that something might have happened that changed, I guess I could say, the direction I was going.
When he got out of prison, that was good, remember?
Well, I don't know. I'm an old Iowa farm boy and spent 21 years in the Air Force. And did
my wife's from Council Bluffs.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
But
well,
so,
that
it made me think.
That's a gift to me. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. If that's all I did, that's all I wanted to do. Is if I was able to make you think. That's all I wanted to do. Thank you.
Anything else, anybody? Well, thanks a lot, Alex. And it sounds like an interesting book. Maybe I'll look into it.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was great.
Thank you. We need to get better lighting on your beautiful face, though. We can't. It's like in a shadow.
Oh, me? No, I'm good.
And I know what you look like.
I was gonna say, beautiful face. You looking at me?
No, Tiffany.
Anyway, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
I'll see you next Tuesday, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.